Okay, as we begin on another rainy morning, let's hope the rain doesn't get too bad since all the creeks and bayous in Baton Rouge are full. I think most of the streets are now dry. Okay, so I'm going to, this is a new video on the Harvey reading. I think the one that's, no, it's a new video, never mind, on the Harvey reading. So let me get started. I'm going to share the outline and talk through this with y'all. Let's see, there we go. All righty, so this is a paper, I guess, was 2015, I think. This was published. It was in a journal, collection of essays on the history of curriculum. And so this is the kind of work that I've been doing, and this is kind of a culmination of a few years' work. I probably started on this in terms of reading Harvey's work, I want to say 2010, probably a little earlier, might be as early as 2008. It's, I'm drawing upon some things out of that history. So who is Harvey? Harvey is a late 15th, early, 16th century arts master at the University of Cambridge. And he, I talk about his history in the reading a little bit. So I'm not going to rehash that too much. Hopefully before you started reading the article, you've read and viewed the videos in topics 1 and 2 in Moodle. So the first assignment, which my intent on that is to help begin expanding your understanding of curriculum. Much of what there is dealing with the school curriculum, which is self-descriptive, everything that has to do with a child in school, beginning when he's picked up with the school bus until he gets home, he or her gets home, including homework. So anything the school has responsibility for is the school curriculum. This would include extracurricular or co-curricular activities, which, including sports, but particularly clubs and things, are very important. And this is one of the things I don't like about the large high schools that we have. I think we would be better off with smaller high schools, um, my high school, Brother Martin is, roughly around 1,400 students. Um, Even that, I think, is a little too big. I think, if I remember correctly, my first high school, St. Aloysius, before it was consolidated with Corey Zoo in New Orleans and became Brother Martin, so I go back a ways. Um, I think we had about um, half of that number, so around 700 to 800 students. I think that is an ideal size because upper class students, particularly sophomores, juniors, seniors, can get involved in co-curricular activities. Um, you know, Depending, I commuted a long way to go to high school, so my options were limited. I tried, had to go to work by the end of my sophomore year. Well, had to go to work. For me to for me to date and to do anything, um, I needed to earn my own money. So, and that's its own education. And unfortunately, I think that is lost for, to a lot of our students today. So, curriculum as a way of thinking of what to teach and how to teach is not a new problem. And so clearly, this is what Harvey's dealing with. He does use the word curriculum in a very particular way that shows that he is a student both of Cicero and Quintellin, as well as Peter Ramus. So Cicero and Quintellin are scholars. Cicero is a lawyer, a great rhetorician by all accounts. Quintellin was more of a school teacher in ancient Rome. But their works have always have played an important role in Western education through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, and really into the 19th century. So the ancients, be it Cicero, Quintellin, or Plato, or Aristotle, Plutarch, to name a few, played an important role in how we thought about education, as long as Latin learning was a fundamental part of schooling in Western Europe and in particularly the United States. Okay. So the concept of curriculum is drawn from the Latin word that describes a short or small race course. The big race course, of course, would be the circus. What we typically watch when we watch Ben-Hur. With the chariot race in Ben-Hur. So culum, C-U-L-U-M, is a diminutive suffix. Currere is the idea of a course. So course of study in this case. Although cursus, the Latin word cursus, is more typically used, and I think you'll find Harvey's use of that word prevalent in the rhetor. It's also prevalent in the other works, like his Ciceronius, which is about Cicero, as that I cite. Um, so curriculum then really originates as an educational shortcut. It is connected fundamentally with the concept map or the diagram, word diagrams, usually a hierarchical diagram, whether it's top to bottom or left to right. Cicero's life is often depicted as sort of the first curriculum. So his life and how he was educated, his course of study, is how we really is really the origins for curriculum. And this was produced by a person who influenced Harvey and influenced the Puritans in particular. Harvey was not a Puritan, but he aligned with the Puritans educationally, particularly in their following of a French arts master from the 15th century by the name of Peter Ramus. He was a reformer. We might today call him a progressive. That would be a little bit unfair. He was very much hated for his reform and what he was doing to particularly logic or the art of dialectic, as well as the arts of grammar and rhetoric. Okay. But the Puritans followed Ramus. They saw him as a kind of martyr for the cause because Ramus was murdered during the anti-Huguenot riots in Paris. He wasn't killed because of his religion, but they used the riot as cover to get rid of him. Okay. But like all things, all martyrs, they rise up and they continue to have influence and Ramus would continue to have influence even to today. But really until the late 18th century, with the development of new logics, both in France and in England. And one of those being John Locke's logic, had a profound influence on how we thought about teaching as well as other things in America as we approached the American Revolution. So the key principle that Harvey lays out, and he adopts this from Cicero as well as Aristotle and Plato, is what is called the threefold tool of ancient education. And those tools are nature, art, meaning method, okay, and exercise, or you could also translate this as practice, but a very particular kind of practice, okay. So, and schooling with Harvey is presented as a personal journey for the student that the teacher walks along with the student through that journey. So we can't think of schooling as we think of it today. It's another generation before we begin to get the notion of classes, of graded classes, and that's really a continental European invention, Germany, tied to Calvinism in its forms of Protestantism. And I think I do refer I don't know if I referred to it here. And of course, Puritans are Calvinists or Reformed Christians, meaning Calvinist. So I go through the meaning of nature, art, and exercise. And quickly, nature is not how we think of nature. Nature is everything that a student brings to school from his and today her upbringing. Okay, so partly it's physiology, but partly it's the culture, the family culture, the neighborhood culture, if you will, who you associate with, that you're raised in. Okay, and culture here is more closely aligned to our traditional notions of culture, which we draw from the Greeks and Romans, and that is to be educated. Okay, so nature was never seen, particularly by the Puritans, as the end. Others did. And in fact, this is a debate that goes back to the ancient Greeks. Can we overcome whatever nature we were born into? Okay. And we see this today with some of our students and their families, that when they essentially shun instruction, okay, think, well, you can't change me. Well, the whole point of instruction is to change you. And what that instruction is what we call art. Now, art here is not fine arts. It is not painting. It is not literature in the high sense. It is not sculpting. All that is referred to as techne in the Greek, which is very different than the art of education. So art is an organizing principle for a subject. So in the medieval world, there were seven liberal arts that a student learned in school, from grammar school through university. And those were the arts of grammar, the arts of rhetoric, the arts of dialectic or logic. Those two are one and the same. Then the arts of music, geometry or math, astronomy. So those are the seven liberal arts. Those would be altered in the late medieval period and into the Renaissance. But we haven't reached, when Harvey's writing, we're just beginning to move, and Harvey's part of that move, from the liberal arts to the humanities. So this idea of humanities doesn't really exist yet, and is part of the reforms to education that Harvey is part of. And it takes a while. It's not really until the mid 17th century that the humanities begin to emerge. Okay, so art is not, what we learn in art class. Art is an organizing principle that evolves into method, right? So the best way to organize an art is to methodize it and organize that art for teaching. So method here means teaching method. Art here means teaching, instruction. And the purpose was to either improve or enhance the student. Exercise, I have experience here as well, is to take what we learn in school and improve it in our everyday lives to live a better life. There's no reason to go to school if it doesn't enhance one's life as an adult. Now, it used to be you're an adult at a much earlier age, right? 15, 16, 17, certainly back in my day in the 60s and early 70s, Generally, you're considered adult at 18. That's why we saw some of the changes in the law. We see the drinking laws change back to 21, in large part because we no longer see people below the age of 21 as an adult. And that in adolescence now can even extend into the 30s, which I think does not aid our society at all. It's not a good thing. But exercise is the use of art, the use of method in our everyday lives to improve our lives. But it has to do mainly with reading and writing, okay? So that is what exercise is. It's the use of reading and writing to gain knowledge to improve your life, okay? So there are two parts to exercise. There is analysis and there is genesis. And analysis is akin to Penelope, who is Ulysses or Odysseus's wife. And if you remember the story, she unravels her carpet so that she doesn't finish it, because when she finishes it, she's told to select a suitor, and she believes Odysseus or Ulysses is still alive on his travels. And of course, at the end, Odysseus shows up, shoots all the suitors with his bows and arrows, and eventually Penelope finishes her carpet or web. So analysis draws evidence from reading the text. And so a marking text activity that you might teach in your classrooms is analysis. It goes back to Ramus. The way we mark text, or the way annotation works when we mark text, is largely a reform that Ramus initiated from in the late medieval period. Okay, it's a kind of, but you can also see evidence drawn from observation as well. Okay, because that's the treatises, the medieval treatises that one would read, largely talk about observation, how I observe the world. This is true of, say, Aristotle's work on his sciences. Also, to back up, art and science here are the one and the same. So it's just there's a different notion for science. Okay, but both are organized for teaching. Okay, so the two parts, analysis, and the other part is genesis. Today we would probably call synthesis, but for exercise, there was always understood to be a kind of creative spark in my taking of the evidence through analysis and recomposing it into some new knowledge. Okay, so think of the essay. So exercise explains what we do when we teach essay writing, drawing evidence, putting it together in some coherent form to address a research question, to address a problem. Okay, that's all we're really talking about. Okay, in this. Harvey talks about the curriculum as a kind of royal road. He's, again, this idea of a journey goes back to the older notion of a course of study as a cursus, or as the course of a river. It's the course of life. Okay. The way we apply method and the way we apply curriculum today, I would argue, is not a journey. It's a course that leads to a kind of cul-de-sac. Think of the race course the circular race course as a kind of cul-de-sac. It's really kind of a dead end. But what the cul-de-sac or race course, circular race course does, it facilitates measurement. It facilitates measurement because you're always ending up where you started, and we want to see if you know more every time you pass that point. So the graded classroom, first, second, third grades, is a cyclical notion of time. Again, it comes out of the Greeks, comes out of the ancient world. We progress by increment, and now we don't progress unless you can pass a test, which I think the ancients in our medieval Renaissance scholars would be appalled to see. And so that's my quick analysis for you of Harvey to help you in the reading. Clearly, if you ever have questions, email me about those. I do try to bring in 4 more modern scholars, although 2 of these are very historical. John Dewey, Alfred North Whitehead, and who you'll see Dewey. You'll see Whitehead, a little bit of Dewey in Dahl's piece. Here's Dahl in his alliteration of the 4 R's, which I apply to, and apply all these to the threefold tool later. And so I won't go into that too much. Whitehead's cycle is more easily understood in terms of threefold tool. Dahl, because of his notion of complexity, complexifies the threefold tool to some degree, although he didn't know he was doing that. I'm the one that identifies this. So I talk about, show up here a little earlier, art was not meant to teach everything that a student needed, which is what we try to do today. Dewey, Dahl, and Whitehead will criticize this, but art was meant to lead us to good action. So good action here, eupraxia in the Greek, is how to live a good life, okay? This is particularly how the Puritans adopted that notion of eupraxia, and is our origins for our concepts of technology, as I write in part in a piece that you read in 504 for those taking 504. So there's a tension between it's an attention of effective teaching versus good teaching. The effective people say that the word good is too broad and nondescript, and I agree, and that's what I like about it. So effective teaching today now leads to best practice, which has become it's not a best practice based on situational class in your classes. It's an ortho practice or an orthodox practice. So many of our schools today use scripts. That's an orthodox practice that it's difficult to go beyond. Good action then, and this comes out of Dahl and Whitehead, helps us to avoid the inert idea. So teaching a concept for the sake of memorization. And for Harvey, along with these ideas, he recognizes the role of novelty in what I teach to gain students' interest. And that is what we really are meant to do as teachers, not find a student's interest necessarily and teach to that, but to get them interested in new ideas and new concepts, new ways of being and living. Okay, and I will end there. Again, as with everything, please email me if you have any questions.